Welcome to the Backlash at Backlash.com. My name is Rod Van Mecklin, and in this video I'm going to read from my 1993 article, White Male Paranoia, the footnoted version of which is linked below. Before I launch into this rant, however, I want to give my usual caveat when ranting about race. I'm a member of the Cowlitz Indian tribe, and I grew up experiencing racism. What? What's that you say? I don't look like an American Indian? Well, just exactly what do American Indians look like? Sioux, Lakota Sioux living in teepees? Even the Lakota Sioux don't live in teepees anymore. No, American Indians come in all shapes and sizes and colors. Sorry about that. So, the all-powerful evil white male, 1993, Bellevue, Washington. We should appreciate the irony of Newsweek's 1993 cover story, Paranoid White Male, an article written by male members of the cultural elite critical of a movement originating with middle and working class men. Such an ironic juxtaposition is not without precedent. Near the end of her career, Susan B. Anthony lamented that while men were more or less ambivalent about women's suffrage, most women opposed it. So much for feminist complaint that, oh, it was sexism, male sexism. No, it wasn't. Check your history, check your facts, check your privilege, feminists. A 1987 Baylor University study also found most men comfortable with the idea of having a woman for a boss, while most women are not. These facts suggest that throughout history, most of the feminists have been men. Does this mean that most of the men's rights advocates will be women? Well, given the weight of historical precedent, it would be a fair bet, but for one hitch. Most women expect men to fix all the ills of society. Consequently, as men, we're on our own, as usual. With this in mind, let's look at what our elitist friends have to say in Newsweek's White Male Paranoia article. Quote, "Before we all nod in agreement that it's twilight time for white guys, we should take another look at the faces on America's currency and in America's Congress." Close quote. Now this is a very interesting idea. Do men gain great advantage over women by having pictures of dead guys on our currency? Not. Personally, I'd like to see Ayn Rand on one of our bills. How about the $10 bill? Guys, gals. What about all those white men elected to Congress? Before we count our blessings, let's ask who voted all those richer-than-thou white men into America's Congress? Women! In general elections, female voters outnumber male voters by almost 10 million. Remember, this was 1993. It's even worse now. And who do they vote for? Joe Biden, yes, back then. Bob Packwood, who was accused of sexual harassment. And more recently, Barack Obama, arguably the worst president in America's history. I am wont to wonder whose faces we'd find in Washington were most voters male. Christina Hoff Sommers is Senate Majority Leader. Dr. Ruth, in charge of Health and Human Services. Christy Hefner, Secretary of Education. Dennis Miller is White House Press Secretary. Michael Crichton, Vice President, and George Gilder for President. Well, sadly, Michael Crichton, who wrote Disclosure, the book that explored the fact that women, too, sexually harass, died in 2008. And he was wealthy. Regardless, the fact is most of the men in Congress are well off, usually charismatic, and powerful, everything the rest of us aren't. They're not like us, don't represent us, have sex with an astounding assortment of liberated women, and the ones who benefit most from their installation are the women who put them into office in the first place. One of the few characteristics these primarily pro-feminist, patriarchal politicians share in common with most men is their gender. And that's a poor basis upon which to make the kind of oversimplified generalizations promulgated by Newsweek's leftist writers. Even worse, however, is what women are saying. Quote, "The white guys who run the business world," a 36-year-old female trucking company executive recently told a Pittsburgh paper, are a bunch of shallow, bald, middle-aged men with character disorders. They don't have the emotional capacity that it takes to qualify as human beings, close quote. Well, given the extent to which women use child protective services, the courts and highly feminized schools to emasculate boys, this is not an incredible statement. Ironically, where genuine masculinity is lacking in the lives of boys, violence follows. Consequently, as these, quote, shallow, bald, middle-aged men, close quote, die off, the civilization built upon their bones will crumble into the ruins of what George Gilder calls the sexual suicide society. A sad footnote to this is that these, quote, shallow, bald, middle-aged men with character disorders, close quote, are the way they are because that's what it takes for men to attract women. As Warren Farrell observed in Why Men Are the Way They Are, women desire nice guy Alan Alda because he's a successful nice guy, not because he's nice. Continuing, quote, the only good thing about these white, male, almost extinct mammals is that they're growing old. We get to watch them die, close quote. Yes, women get to watch men die. That's because American women get just about the best health care in the world. It's far superior to what the providers of that health care, American men, get. Women should enjoy this because, well, they can, because eventually, when men wise up to the fact that all the thanks we're going to get for our hard work and sacrifice is the glee women take in watching us die, this may change. Can you say MGTOW? Continuing, quote, it's still a statistical piece of cake being a white man, at least in comparison with being anything else, close quote. One would presume a publication such as Newsweek would have access to the Statistical Abstract of the United States 1993 edition, but apparently they don't. Continuing, quote, white males make up just 39.2% of the population, yet they account for 82.5% of the Forbes 400. Keep in mind, I wrote this in 1993. 77% of Congress, 92% of state governors, 70% of tenured college faculty, almost 90% of daily newspaper editors, 77% of TV news directors, close quote. Okay, one at a time. Referring to the Statistical Abstract of the United States, 1993 edition. There are 400, surprise, Forbes 400. Of them, 330 are white guys, which leaves approximately 82 million white guys who are not members of the Forbes 400. It's even more now. In 1990, there were 435 members of the House and 100 senators, and 412 of them were primarily pro-feminist white guys elected by women. According to Newsweek, again, this leaves approximately 82 million white guys who are not so privileged. 50 state governors, 46 of them primarily pro-feminist men, 773,000 college faculty, tenured and untenured. I don't have the number of tenured faculty, but this indicates a maximum of 541,000 of them could be primarily pro-feminist tenured male faculty. 279,000 editors and reporters for a maximum possible of 251,000 primarily pro-feminist male editors of daily newspapers. And I don't know how many primarily pro-feminist TV news directors, but it really doesn't matter because the point is that the sum of all of the above numbers, which are taken from the Statistical Abstract of the United States, 1993 edition, which explains why they're so raw, amounts to less than 1% of the American white male population. That was 1993. 2015, obviously, it's even a smaller percentage today, which raises the question, how do the remaining 99+% of white men benefit from any of this? Do they derive benefits that American women of any race do not? Do most white men have wives in these fields who bring home fat paychecks? No. But American women get far more money and derive far more social utility from the placement of these men than the 99+% of American men do. Yes, yet the elitist leftists at Newsweek feign amazement that white men would think themselves worthy of victim status. Quote, "So now they want underdog status too, and the moral clout that comes with victimhood?" Close quote. More than 80% of the homeless are male. Men account for most of the on-the-job deaths and injuries, and white males have the highest suicide rate of all, killing themselves almost twice as often as black males, almost 4 times the rate of white females, and 9 times the rate of black females. And even as feminist media moguls justifiably decry the rape in Bosnia, remember this was 1993, men remain the primary casualties of war. Despite these facts, Newsweek's leftist writers predictably conclude on a sour note. Quote, "Generations of white males judged women and minorities not by what they did, but by what they were. Turnabout is fair play. White men are now beginning to say, only fair play is fair play. It figures that they'd think of that now." Close quote. What doesn't figure is that Newsweek's presumably bright leftist writers would know that men today are not responsible for what men did 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 years ago. Men did not start the women's movement, but they comprise the majority of both active and passive supporters of women's rights. Read your histories, boys. Might start with Sex and History by Ray Tannehill, great book. It was out of a sense of fair play that powerful white men in the 1960s, most of whom are now elderly, retired, or dead, acknowledged the justice of the first wave feminist cause. And it is to those men and the feminists who appealed to them with the dictionary definition of feminism, which we all know today is a lie, that women today owe the rights they now take for granted. Feminists are not interested in equality. Just read second wave feminists Catherine McKinnon, Marilyn French, Robin Morgan, or June Stevenson, and you'll see what I mean. The white men who are beginning to say, quote, "only fair play is fair play," close quote, are the same guys who grew up with the second wave feminist movement. For many of these then verging on middle-aged white men, of course, now they're in their 60s and 70s and 80s, women's rights made as much sense as men's rights, and they were appalled by the apparent anti-female sexism of generations past. But, and here's where they went wrong, they thought that equal rights meant equal rights. And what is getting to them now is that feminists want more than equal rights for women, and male elitist snobs like the leftist writers at Newsweek agree, and misuse their formidable power to oppress their middle and working class brothers in the name of an anti-male misandrous agenda. 2015, Olympia, Washington. I wrote that 22 years ago, and all of it is even more true today than it was then. Women's favorable statistics are greater, men's unfavorable statistics are worse, and as bad as it was getting for the men of the baby boom generation, it has gotten steadily worse for the men of subsequent generations. In previous videos, I've read what I wrote years ago that others then echoed before I started making videos, of how a collapsing economy will cause the failure of the state's leftist programs for women and a return to freedom and liberty that will favor men. But I also warned of factors mitigating against us, developments that might save these programs. That's still true. But on his blog, linked below, Martin Armstrong writes that his computer model predicts a shift during the coming 5 years away from government, the progressives, and socialism toward the private sector and the rise of a strong third-party support. One of the most famous feminist slogans is, "The personal is political," and feminists are very political. Yet, we have a lot of MRAs and FRAs and MHRAs saying that, oh no, this isn't about politics, there's no politics involved. Hogwash! MGTOW are already voting with their refusal to support the marriage and divorce industry. Isn't it time that MGTOW also got involved in politics? There are a lot of politicians who talk a good game during election time, but there are precious few in the two major political parties who refuse to play the game. Currently, Donald Trump is talking a good game, but he has a long record of being a crony capitalist, and I don't take his campaign seriously. Rand Paul is almost certain to lose to Jeb Bush, but he has my support until then. After that, the only political party that, as a party, deserves the support of MGTOW is the Libertarian Party. Why? Because by its very nature, MGTOW is libertarian. We oppose aggression, that is, the initiation of the use of force, as opposed to defensive force. We demand our freedom and liberty, and these are fundamental to the libertarian political philosophy. I would really like to see Rand Paul elected to the White House, but I fear that Doug Casey is right and that it would be futile. What would not be futile would be if millions of MGTOW were to flock to the polls and vote for anybody who runs as a libertarian. That's all for now. Check out the other videos, subscribe to the channel. For the Backlash at Backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mechelen.